Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings, but this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018, and no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. Kristen McGuiness is the author of Live Through This, a novel. Kristen is the founder of Storyboxing, which provides content, coaching, and courses for people looking to write the good fight. In addition, she is a co-founder, vice president, and editor-at-large of Row House, a disruptive publishing imprint at the intersection of wellness and social justice, founded by bestselling author Rebecca Barucki. Kristen is also the bestselling author of 5150, The Magical Adventures of a Single Life, which was optioned by Original Films / CBS Cable with Alison Brie attached to star. She has over 20 years' experience in book development, writing, and editorial, working with such authors as Dr. Phil McGraw, Dr. Stephen Covey, Chris Matthews, Leanne Logothetis, Joe Gorga, Darren Prince, Rebecca Barucki, and more. She began her career working in publicity for St. Martin's Press before joining the editorial departments of Simon & Schuster, Free Press, and Judith Regan at HarperCollins. Since then, Kristen has also worked in nonprofit fundraising as a strategic grants and marketing director, helping to raise millions for local and international nonprofits. Kristen has appeared on The Today Show, in USA Today, and in Marie Claire, and has written for numerous publications, including Huffington Post, Scary Mommy, Psychology Today, Salon, and The Fix. Kristen has written and co-written multiple film and TV projects and one weird play. Kristen received her bachelor's degree in government from Hamilton College and a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Paris. She lives in Ojai, California, with her husband, 2 children, and their dog, Peter, and has now founded Rise Books. Her book was the very first book of the new imprint. Welcome, Kristen. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss your novel, Live Through This, which, by the way, I thought was a memoir until I started reading, and I was like, her name's not Jane. Anyway, it's a novel. Thank God.
You were like, wait, it's like, I don't remember reading about this.
I know. Well, I know. Then I got to like the main event. I was like, no. I mean, I figured it out within like a page, but and I was like, oh, I don't know why I thought it was a memoir. Anyway, I just want to start by saying I know we had coffee and we got to know each other and you told me about your book and blah, 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 but you are a really good writer. I'm sure you know this, but you're really, really good. So anyway, I was so delighted to read it and be like, wow, she is a really awesome writer. So just wanted to tell you that.
I appreciate that. Well, thank you. Yeah. And we had a fantastic event actually at Zibby's last night.
Yes.
That's why I'm in said hotel room, because we were at the bookshop with Jen Pasteloff, and it was amazing. We had such a fantastic time. So it's Zibby Day.
Oh my gosh.
But, and then it was funny because the Post-its Lauren Schwartzfeld, who's our director of publicity at Rise, that she gave me were these ones my what if year. So I didn't realize that until like I was going on with you. And she was like, by the way, she like literally handed me these and I've been using them in the book. And she was like, that was from Zibby's first book launch. So anyway, it's all Zibby right now over here. So it's very funny.
Thanks for living through that.
Yeah.
So tell listeners about your novel. And then I really want you to explain your whole sort of career trajectory and all the amazing things you do and everything. But first, the book.
Absolutely. No. And thank you for having me. Yeah. I mean, I really before we started, I sort of said, I was like, I have kids, and then laughed. I was like, oh yeah, that's why we're doing this. The moms don't have time to read. And I think that's why I wrote this book, was because I do have children. And like a lot of us living in America with children and the epidemic of gun violence, like I just hit a place of like, what can I do? And so it was 2016. A lot of us, I feel like it's almost like hurricane season here, where there's just like a rash of mass shootings. And and you just feel like you can't even go outside. And it just, for me personally, felt like it kept getting closer to home. There were quite a few shootings that actually like I had personal connections to. And about 6 months before, actually, my mother's partner, his brother was shot and killed by a coworker. He was he was the CEO of a tech company in Chicago, and his CTO came into the office and killed him. So gun violence was just feeling really present in my own personal life. But then culturally, obviously, watching it just all around us. And yeah, I was laying on the couch with my 1-year-old baby, who's now a 8.5-year-old young girl, but she was a little babe at the time, trying to get her to go to sleep and scrolling, on Facebook as we did back then. Now it's like Instagram, but I was like scrolling on Facebook, and the Pulse shooting was happening. And I just asked myself, what can I do? And I knew I had one quality skill set, which was writing. And I decided I'm going to write a book about it. So, there is a mass shooting that is at the center of the book. I say initially the shooting took place like in chapter 8, and sort of both from a narrative perspective, but I think actually like it's helped from like a talking about it perspective. We moved it up to chapter 2, which really allows it to not be a secret, and the main character, Jane, is a survivor of that shooting. And it's a lot about navigating both the emotions, obviously, of that. And she loses a loved one in that shooting. And it's a very horrific, traumatic event, not surprisingly, but also after the fact, she's not only navigating grief, but then she's navigating like a new public platform, which not all survivors, certainly there are plenty that don't end up with a public platform. But again, I wrote this in 2016, so it was prior to Parkland. And then I sort of watched it happen in live time with the kids in Parkland, who now have all said like there was like an additional trauma of also becoming sort of political celebrities in the aftermath when they were still in the grief and trauma of what they had survived. So it's a lot about that, but also about love and marriage and motherhood. And last night when we were at Zibby's, we talked a lot about friendship, which is actually a core piece of the book too, and especially female friendship, which I know like for a lot of us, that's what buoys us, right? And that's what keeps us going even in the hardest times of our life. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, I couldn't watch it live last night, but I'm going to go back and watch because I want to get to know Jen better, and I can't wait to hear what you had to say in the event. There was a moment in the book where, right after the horrific shooting where Jane is like shell-shocked with her mom getting in the car and decides to sort of speak to the waiting massive reporters and just said like, guns do this. And her mom's like, wait, why did you say that? I feel like it's this big turning point to your comment about the victims having to take on these other identities. And I feel like for her, that was a moment where her life, obviously her life had been shattered and went in a different direction moments before. But I feel like for her, and perhaps for all the other survivors, there's that question of, do you come forward and what do you say? And do you want to have to speak out? It's so obvious, right? But then your own personal life is shattered. So I don't know. I feel like that was such a pivotal moment for Jane, at least.
Yeah. And I really, the thing about that moment is that she refuses to take off the clothes, and she doesn't, like, that's not a political statement. She's just traumatized. And the idea, I think I've not personally gone through this, so it is truly fiction, but I know that like anytime you've lost someone, right? I just know that just from losing loved ones, right? Like, it's almost like you don't want to change clothes because then that means like the thing happened, right? It's almost like that first like moment of moving on. It's like that first time you go to sleep and you wake up in the new reality. And so she doesn't she's terrified to get out of the clothes, and they're trying to get her out of the clothes because we've never seen that before, right? We actually don't see survivors post-shooting. And I spoke with a friend who is an emergency doctor about like what that triage looks like and what their protocols are. And so she kind of she's not supposed to, and she sort of gets out of that urgent care where they're holding folks after the fact just to take statements. And when she comes out, she's drenched in dried blood. And and so I sort of love that, didn't love, but I love depicting a scene that we don't usually get to see, which makes the violence truly, really visceral, not just for the reader who's reading it, but in the story itself, for the camera people who take her picture. And it's why she ends up going viral, much to her dismay. That's not her intention at all. Right. And it is sort of this quick decision that, her mother, who's both politically conservative, but also just, conservative in behavior, and is like, why would you do that? And James, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Like, I'm not even functioning. And it ends up really snowballing into something much bigger than she anticipates.
Yes. Involving the president, in fact, much later. Could not snowball any higher.
The cameo of the unnamed president.
Yes.
And I will say that did come from reality. In writing the book, I reached out to a couple of people who were survivors of shootings. One who was actually in a shooting, another whose husband who had died in the San Bernardino shooting, a man named Ryan, and I can't remember Ryan's name offhand right now, but Ryan's husband was shot and killed in the San Bernardino shooting, which had taken place in 2016, and which was definitely one of the shootings that inspired me to write the book. And when stories got out, his husband had actually protected two coworkers in that shooting, two women who had children, in fact. And he sent them out of the area and closed the door, and he ended up getting shot. And so when that news report came out, it was a viral sort of report about that shooting, about this man who saved these two women's lives. And so Ryan was interviewed, and Ryan ended up going viral himself and was interviewed in all these articles. And he had news trucks down his street, and he began to actually develop agoraphobia. Much later, he ended up having really horrific psychological consequences between the grief and the public reaction. But he was actually invited to the State of the Union as Michelle Obama's guest. And so he went with First Lady Michelle Obama and then met President Obama and had a moment alone in the room with both the president and the First Lady, and had this real moment of if I could say anything, what do I want to say? And he said that he got so nervous, he didn't take advantage of that opportunity. And that really stuck with me. So I wanted this character to also have that same moment where she's alone in a room with the president, and what do you say? And this one chance that you have to speak to the most important person on the planet and beg, and which is what she does. But it was based off of Ryan's experience, where he said he just shut down and literally was these hors d'oeuvres are great, I think that's what he said. I think he said these canapes are great, and then he didn't know how to pronounce canapé, and then he just went into a death spiral of I said the word wrong. But he was awesome, and we actually met at the memorial for the victims of that shooting, and he shared a lot about his husband, but also what he had gone through in the aftermath. So I really wanted to and he has a cameo in the book as a bartender, but I really wanted to honor his experience too through it. So
wasn't this very traumatic, even just researching and writing? I mean, reading it made me, I love books that make me feel. This book completely made me feel. I was holding my heart, the whole scene was so real, and the piece of, oh my gosh, so real. So yeah, just I feel like I read the most, I hadn't read a first person account in this language, in this way. And I know it was fiction, but what was this like for you to have to piece together and talk to so many survivors? I know you've had experience directly, but still, this is a tough sort of, pond to wade through of horrific information.
Yeah, I think what was the most traumatic part of it was how many times I'd be working on it and a mass shooting would take place. And there was a moment I remember, so it does take place in 2016, and the main character ends up at the Women's March in Los Angeles, and she speaks it, she ends up kind of getting this public platform, again, much like the kids from Parkland. And she ends up speaking at the Women's March, and I was writing that scene with the day after the Las Vegas shooting. I had planned to write that scene, and I was at a hotel to write that scene, and I wake up and literally the news is coming through of the worst mass shooting, actually, I think in American history. And I was this is so weird. This is, what is this? What timing? By the time I was done with this book, I was so used to being in the middle of writing a scene, editing the book, working on the book with a mass shooting on the TV in the background, that it wasn't even weird anymore, which that was probably the most traumatizing part of it was, I was editing when Uvalde happened and the Buffalo shooting happened. And I was just it's not even oh, what crazy timing. It's just, this is what life is here now. And that was probably the most traumatic piece of it, was to realize that it's not even it's not a coincidence anymore.
Mhm.
It's just a chronic state of being. And so that was really the hardest part, was to be working on it for so many years and in the process just watching it continue to happen and with no real change, which is what the book is a lot about, because it's not just I mean, one of my dear friends blurbed it, Gina Frangello, and in that blurb, she was like, make no mistake, this is a call to action. And truly, that's why I wanted to write it. Much like Shannon Watts created Mom's Demand, I was like, I don't want to, I was like, I had a 1-year-old. I was like, I don't have time to do that. That feels very hard. Little did I know writing this book would end up being just as hard, but but I was like, I could write a book. And really it was that idea of like, how do we emotionally galvanize us to not go numb, to demand action, to demand real change around assault weapons in this country. And sort of no matter what our political views are on gun ownership, and I personally am not against people having private gun ownership. I don't believe there's any reason to own an assault weapon. And no one, and as I say, like, no one protects their home with an AR-15. That's just not a reality. Like, especially if you have children, you're not going to use a weapon that would spray bullets all over your house. Like, that's just not, no one would do that. Anybody who owns a gun would say no. Like, so why do we keep that weapon around if it's just for recreation? Like, why would we have a recreational thing that's also a weapon of mass destruction? So that was really what the book was about. It was just like, this is a real low-hanging fruit. And for some reason, administration after administration, no one does anything about it. And it shouldn't be that hard of a thing to fix, especially when it causes such devastation.
Do you align yourself with any of the nonprofits who tackle this? I know you can't start one, and that's totally fine. But I know there are many. Are there any you support or endorse, or for people listening, if they want to make change after reading your book, like, where should they go? What should they do next?
Yeah, no, I've long been a supporter of Mom's Demand and Everytown Gun Safety, which are, the same organization. Mom's Demand is a part of it now. But next week, and I'm actually doing an event in Chicago on October 24th with Pastor Brenda Mitchell, who's part of Everytown and Mom's Demand. She lost a son to gun violence, and she's actually been ahead of their DEI initiatives. I'm a book coach, and she's a private client of mine. So it was wild because we started working together, and I had no idea what she did for a living and what her, work was. And then I found out, and I was like, oh my, can we do an event together like this? I sent her the book immediately. And I think there's a lot of great organizations that are doing good work. I also think it's about us, really, especially when we have the president we currently do. And, I certainly hope he gets another term, is really pushing him to see where executive orders can be done around assault weapons, especially around manufacturing and importation, that are things you can control through an executive order. You can't control sales and possession, but there are things that can be executive ordered to curtail the amount of assault weapons in this country, which at this point we have more than enough. Like, that's not, there's no reason. So I do think there's things that we as individuals can do. And then I think Everytown has been around for a long time and been doing good work. And Sandy Hook Promise is another wonderful one that, I can't, like Uvalde and Sandy Hook as parents, obviously that's, and even Parkland, I always remember, and I can't remember his name now, but one of the fathers from Parkland, like, his great tragedy and his daughter passing away that morning was that she didn't kiss her, goodbye in the morning. Like, it was just a busy morning, right? And she left for school that day. And like, that story, it's like, it's just the fear in your heart, right? And like, my kids never walk out the door without a kiss in the morning for exactly that reason. Like, I'm like, you will never leave this house to go to school without that like formal goodbye, sadly, because I don't know what could happen there. And I think that is like, again, as a mom, that's what inspired this, was that I just don't want to live in a world where I have to have that fear when I put my child in the car every morning to go to school, and it shouldn't be. It's just, most developed nations look at us like we're absolutely insane. They're like, what is wrong with you people? So.
Oh my gosh. Well, Kristen, talk a little bit about how you got into writing, also publishing. Talk about Rise. The whole thing, everything you're doing is really cool. Tell everybody who's listening about it, because they need to know.
Absolutely. Well, I think you and I are very reflective of each other and what we are doing and have done. It's really funny. But yeah, primary background was in traditional book publishing, and I started out at Simon and Schuster. And I mean, I worked in publicity at St. Martin's Press very briefly, but moved over to editorial at Simon and Schuster. And then I worked in film development for a little bit, and then moved back over to work at HarperCollins with Judith Begin, who was a very prominent publisher back in the day, still is, but she sort of was at the height of her powers during that time. And then I wrote my first book and got into the world of ghostwriting and did that for many years. And then, as I think a lot of people do, began to, I was always editing and helping people with book proposals. So that was, kind of my bread and butter for a very long time. But a few years ago, I started a book coaching company called Rise Writers, which is still in existence. And, I have group workshops for memoir writers and book proposals, and I'm hoping to start a fiction one. And I have private clients and, the ones that are sort of more likely to get book deals that I often help to secure agents and publishers. But what I realized was not everybody was going to get a traditional book deal. That just wasn't going to be possible. And I mean, we both know what that world looks like. It is very, very hard. And actually last week we were in New York and we were at an event with Gretchen Rubin, who said, the hardest thing is getting an agent. And I just that stuck with me so much because it's so true. And I think people don't realize like how hard that process is. And it is. And so I just saw, as a coach, I had a lot of amazing writers who I loved, and I loved their stories and I loved their books. And I also knew there was no way they were going to get a traditional book deal. And so I wanted to create a home for them. And so I began Rise Books. So I started my own small independent publishing house, much like you. In fact, that's why Zibby and I have already met because I interviewed her for a piece that I'm writing about the rise of the smallish publisher. And I like to say we're like independence with big ambitions. And I think it is I think independent publishing historically, though there have been some really big ones that, Hay House sounds true, Shambhala. It's not that there aren't big independents out there. And certainly in the fiction world, the same. But I know that there are also many who have struggled that became nonprofits or ended up attaching themselves to universities. And I think that we're sort of part of a generation that we do see ourselves as direct competition to traditional big publishing. And I wanted to show that a book could be a platform in and of itself. And I think that does come from, I joke, I started out in book publishing 20,000 years ago because that's how long it feels. But it was really, it was pre-social media. It was 1999 when I started, like the internet was still this like Google had just begun, right? And so it was not an era where there wasn't social media. So really there were brand name authors that like everybody knew, right? They were like household names. And then there was a whole swath of authors that no one had ever heard of before. And they were given book deals simply for the quality of their stories and their writing and who they were and our belief in them to sell their book. And so I wanted to take it back to 1999, and create the same kind of energy around books that like the book can be the platform. And it's a way for people to build out all the other pieces of marketing and the work and how we share and how we build community in the world. And I think that is, to me, and I was saying this last night actually at Zibby's, that I think that's why books are so important, as you have seen too, right? It's like they build so much community.
So what advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Just keep writing. It really is. I think a lot of people think that there's some fast and quick road to, and some people do. It's not to say some people do have a fast and quick road to getting published, and that's can be part of it. But I think that for a lot of other people, if it doesn't happen immediately, they think they failed or they're not a good writer or some other lie we tell ourselves. And I always say writing is like, I was joking the other day, I did an event with Rob Bell and I was saying writing is a really dumb idea. Like for a lot of people, it's not like there usually isn't money on the table for it. It's this thing you do in your free time. There's no guarantee you're going to be successful. And there are a lot of people in your life that are probably like, that's a cute hobby. Like maybe you should do something else, right? And I think that if you believe that you have a story to share, like you have to keep going with it. It's why I ended up publishing Live Through This on Rise Books. I didn't build Rise Books for Live Through This. I built it for other authors, but I had signed about 3 authors and was trying to sell Live Through This. I had an agent, I got an agent, and we weren't getting that immediate yes. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to stay in the badlands of silence that happens in book publishing, where like you get a couple rejections and then you just wait forever for responses. And it's a really tough place to be. It's that silence is where, the writer's brain is like, shouldn't have done this anyway. And I was like, I'm not gonna, I don't have to do that. I actually created something, and I decided to go first because I figured if I screwed it up, the author couldn't hate me that much. But but I also realized like it's also the story of being a writer, that like it really is about persistence and just keep going. And if you believe in the story you have to share, like don't worry if it takes a lot of time. Like that can be a beautiful journey in and of itself. So I think it's just enjoy the journey of writing. Take it for what it is, and don't give up on it. So that's how you end up with one of these.
Kristen, thank you so much. Thanks for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Thank you for this beautiful, thought-provoking, action-inspiring novel and for all that you're doing. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye, Kristen. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.